Hey everybody, we are back in the knife lab. Today we are getting back to basics, getting the show back on track, reviewing something that of course most of us do actually tune into this channel to see, and the thing on the table today shouldn't be too far from everyone's hearts, and that is of course this giant book of pornography from the late 1800s to the mid 1900s. Would it help if I reminded you that all these ladies are now probably dead?
No, it's even worse.
Well, I guess in that case we'll have a look at the Spyderco Military. This is a classic Spyderco. It is a quintessential part of their evergreen lineup, made in Golden, Colorado. This is a sprint run of a knife pattern that has had very little change happening to it since its initial inception. So you may notice the Paramilitary is the Paramilitary 2. And that's the one you buy these days. The Endura is up to the Endura 4, the Native is up to the Native 5. The military has stayed at the military. I think there's been a couple of little tiny bits of CQI, Constant Quality Improvement, CQC.
Excellent.
No. But really, I've got an old military lying around, and apart from some minor dimensional differences, and I'm talking I can't barely measure them, but I can just kind of feel them, this is largely unchanged since it was incepted. The brief was, Sal Glesser was asked by that ever mysterious someone, "Hey Sal, if you had a son you were sending to war, what knife folding would you send with him?" And he said, well, it has to be something that's lightweight and strong and suited for hard use. And this is his version of a knife that does those three things. I've used it a fair bit. I haven't taken it to war. That is for sure. And I mean, the whole thing about the knife industry does often just add a very cool and tough job onto their sort of knife designs. And they generally sort of, maybe someone's taken this to war, but most of us probably haven't. But that's, that's the brief, but I've just used it in very much an everyday sense. So it's a large everyday carry knife for the rest of us who perhaps don't fuss too much about the marketing guff. And at that it does very, very well. It's an older pattern of knife, and you can sort of feel that. There are some things that nowadays knives generally don't have, and I'll cover those in a second. None of them are deal breakers. This is a high quality piece. This knife here is in the Jade G10, which is like the raw G10 color, slightly greenish maybe, and then M4 steel. You're generally going to get a military in black G10 and S30V steel, not unlike this Native Chief here. And that brings me to the other point of this video. I'm going to compare this to the other military knife, the military series from Spyderco, and also some other large Spydercos that may do the same work for you, or may have some slight differences that appeal to you more or less. So without further pornography, I guess let's look at the size comparison. We'll show this next to a whole bunch of other knives so you can get an idea of its dimensions in your brain. So yes, this review has been some time coming. There were some minor setbacks to the whole thing. So we are going to think of this as a normal guy's everyday carry knife and the applications that, average folks are going to be putting it into. So of course, part of my testing, I manufactured some tests, like cutting materials that, more test the ergonomics and the blade geometry, and then just did a whole bunch of everyday stuff like unboxing things, cutting up small serves of fruit and vegetables for kids, and minor roles in meal prep, things like that. And I'm happy to say that this is an excellently well-performing Spyderco knife. It's not, there's not going to be really any surprises here. It's going to cut about as good as, say, a Paramilitary 2, which cuts fine. cuts good. They're not the world's thinnest behind the edge knives, and they're not as crazy slicey as, say, like a Buck or a Chris Reeve hollow grind or anything like that. But it's just a good stout enough blade shape and pattern that has a generally good overall balance between, you know, slicing capabilities, a little bit of perhaps edge torque resistance, all that sort of good stuff. So it's a well-performing blade. Now, I usually like to break the sort of whole knife down into its components and sort of talk about what I like and what I dislike about each part. So let's take it down to the tabletop where I can show you a bit more detail about that. So the first thing I guess I'll talk about is the blade. And now some of this is probably not going to be as relevant to you because you may not have this M4 version. I'm not sure if this version is still available anywhere. Obviously there's always a secondary market, but so the part about the steel, which I'll get out of the way first, the M4 steel is a longer lasting edge than the standard S30V. However, it is a little bit more tarnishable, so less tarnish resistant, which means it'll rust and develop sort of stains and discoloration due to the basic absence of much in it to stop that from happening. So things like chromium are in your usual stainless steel. So say S30V here is a stainless steel and it has lots of chromium in it, and that will generally help with rust resistance. This doesn't have much of that. M4 is like a tool steel, and I think any arbitrary amount of chromium it has is just, it's the purpose of that element is often just towards malleability and, you know, ductility of the steel as well. It's only when you put it in a larger amount that it really contributes to much rust resistance. So M4 is like a high-speed tool steel. It's been shown to hold a good long edge and also have some sort of shock resistance, impact resistance, that sort of thing, more so than lots of the other more sort of ultra high-end, super high carbide steels. So M4 is an old favorite. It's probably largely outdone by some of the more expensive steels like sort of 10V, even S110V may hold an edge for about the same amount of time, which it does in my testing, and it will also be stainless. M4 you can generally get at a slightly lower cost, and it's just got a certain character to it, I suppose, that some people enjoy. And if stain resistance isn't, you know, particularly high on your needs, and you like how a knife kind of eventually shows signs of use, this is a bit dirty. I can clean this off, so Brian's knife won't be as horrible to look at when I send it back. But yeah, it's a bit of a deal that you make with M4. So if that's for you, then it's for you. If it's not, it's not. I quite like it. Totally fine with it. Don't mind if my knife patinas just a little bit. The blade is this basically a 4-inch. Just under, I think, if you factor in the cutting edge and stuff. Full flat grind. The spine thickness, I believe, is just where I think it's 3.7 millimeters. Whole weight of the thing's 128 grams, 4.5 ounces. The edge length, that's the one, 3.68 inches, 94 millimeters. But then the whole blade is like 4 inches overall, 102 millimeters. When you close it, it is 5.5 inches long. Can you tell I'm reading from a spec sheet? Yes, I'm hoping I'm being cool about it. 5.5 inches, 140 millimeters. G10 is obviously the handle material. You've got a overall length of 9.5 inches, 241 millimeters, and I think that's all the purient stats that I would need to tell you. So overall, it's a larger knife. It's not particularly thick, but it is definitely on the larger side. It's about the same as feels to me very similar to having like a Rat number 1 in your pocket, maybe even a little bit bigger, and it's probably a little tiny bit lighter due to the lack of double liners. So in terms of the guts of the blade, you've got a liner lock, which means you just push a leaf of steel that's inside the handle across, which no longer then makes contact with the back of the blade tang, and the knife can swing shut. You've got one hand opening deployment via the Spidey hole. So there we are, and then you've got a single steel liner, which is the one that forms the liner lock, and then on the other side you've got, I guess you'd call this a liner as well, but it's mainly just reinforcing, highly skeletonized, mainly just reinforcing where these screws go in, just a very thin piece of steel on this side as well, and you can sort of see it through the material. So it's not an ultra rigid, sort of super, overbuilt kind of knife. G10's a very strong material though, and they've definitely gone with lightness and sort of portability, I suppose, over having a very strong rigid knife. If you're after something that's much, much stronger, maybe one of the competitors that I'll show later, the Spyderco Police 4, with its two sort of rather thick stainless steel liners, which are almost as thick as the G10 on either side of them, is probably a more a stronger knife in terms of resisting odd forces that perhaps the knife shouldn't be meeting with anyway. So that's that. The handle style is nice and kind of bone-shaped. It's wavy, but it's very simple still. So your standard position I'm finding when I'm holding this knife is like this. It's good for a larger hand, even an extra large hand will probably have some room left over on it. End here is sort of nice for sort of leaning back on a little bit. I use this, this particular leverage comes in handy when you're cutting through quite difficult things. So say when I take it against the vinyl tubing, which is pretty nasty stuff to cut, I find that I kind of lever the knife back, and as the knife pushes down through things, you can sort of countersink it with your fist there. It works kind of well, works pretty good. And then of course, when you're doing what's a great way of testing ergos on a knife is a holding rope cut. So standing and holding things to your chest and chest levering a rope cut, that reveals handle weaknesses very quickly. And this is, apart from the standard folding knife stuff of there's still a channel here which you can sort of dig your hand into a little bit. It's a very, very comfortable handle. Very nice, basic, intelligent handle. You can choke up, for sure, if you like to pinch and do your detail work with your knife, then absolutely fine to do that as well. The pocket clip is tip down only. Now, I have come to a conclusion with a couple of these tip down knives that it really makes very little practical difference in terms of retrieving the knife. And largely, I think the clip position on a knife is mainly there for how comfortable it feels in the hand when the knife is opened. Because sometimes on a knife, if I was to put this clip back here, I think it may decrease the comfort level because I've got a nice thin full contact all around this whole finger. Without this clip, there isn't kind of an air bubble that the clip introduces into the grip down here near this pinky, and that's where you get a lot of your counter leverage from. So maybe there's something to it. Maybe they just aren't lazy and haven't gotten around to reiterating this with a standard 4-way style pocket clip, because maybe they decide, you know what, we're happy with it. We have a reason for it, and I can very much appreciate that reason. So yes, it's an older fashioned thing, but the cool thing about this, because the spider hole kind of drops down because of that forward choil, you don't really have a huge amount sticking out, not much more than you would, in fact, probably even a bit less than you would if the knife was clipped at this end of your pocket. So yeah, this is going to stick out, but that's not too bad. Like if you wanted a deep carry super covert knife, you wouldn't be in the market for a military anyway. So there's that. The clip it works really well, and I'm happy enough with it being tip down. I don't really care. I've stopped caring. It's one of those debates that I think might be a bit pointless. I don't know. Just one guy. But there we go. Another thing that's always struck me as a bit odd about the Spyderco military, and this is just, I'm not even sure if this is a thing, but this tang, the square tang, sort of protrudes around the top a little bit, and it's something I always kind of find as I open it. I always feel that tang going in, and that's a bit of an older fashioned thing. I think most knives are all about sort of, see, even here's the Para 3, right? So there's a little tiny bit of it, but it's way less. Here's a Bushman. That one's completely hidden. The Police. Just, yeah, it's funny. It's one of those things that maybe because of it's a liner lock as well, but yeah, just an older fashioned thing where like this blade tang is highly concealed most of the time in knives, but there you go. So that's one little design thing that I feel is perhaps a little bit outdated, but again, geez, it's nothing really. The giant lanyard hole is great for the people who like to dress their knives up or use a lanyard, for sure. It's never been me and never will be me. There's big, strong hardware on here, so like a large, I think it's a number 8 or number 10 Torx even for the pivot. Overall, it's a really well built and well handling knife. I have very few criticisms of the Spyderco military. The whole thing is going to come down to if it's for you or not. And I mean, you may want, if you're EDCing, you may want the Para 3, which is a lot smaller. And anyway, I guess going off of that, let's bring it into, I'll start with my little large Spyderco knives comparison. So there's one notable absence here, I think, of the current large Spyderco knives. And that is, of course, the, what is it? The amalgam, yes, the amalgam has moved on. So that's kind of a flipper variant of a knife that is about this size but has a big kind of different shaped blade on it. These three, so you've got the Native Chief, you've got the Police, and you've got the Military. So they're all fairly similar in the blade shape, right? The Police has a slightly longer blade, the Native has a slightly, or the Native Chief has a slightly shorter blade. These are going to both be in S30V at retail unless you get a Sprint. This is in K390. The Police is the largest and the heaviest of all the knives because it has full stainless steel liners, has the longest blade, the longest handle. The Native Chief is the lightest and sort of nimblest of the knives, owing to that it's the smallest. It's got a bit of a lockback assembly, which does make it almost the same weight as the military, but still lighter than the Police K390. So I would say that these differences are going to come down to, there's a couple of things. If you like your Spyderco hole hidden and with no hump, then the Native Chief is for you. Like you're not encumbered by that sort of arch that you get on a lot of these other ones. So that's what you're getting on the Native Chief. You're getting a 4-way pocket clip again. You're on a lock back, so in that way it's similar to the Police. And yeah, still getting overall very well done golden Colorado construction in this one and in this one. So this is similar to this in that it is a lock back with black G10 handles. These two are similar in that they are a little bit on the larger side, the standards of leaf-shaped blade, and these two are similar in that they're both made in Golden, Colorado, which is Spyderco's American plant. This one is a Seki City, Japan, and Seki City, Japan makes the worst built Spydercos. They're not terrible, but of the 4 places that Spyderco is currently building knives, being Golden, Seki, Maniago, and Taiwan, and China, of course, A5, I would even argue that the Seki ones are usually a little bit worse than the China Spydercos. It's just something that's going on over there. I'm not sure what the issue is.
You got that Seki City lean, girl. Oh yeah, fuck your resale.
But this one here, Chris sent this to me for a great price. He's had to put a second washer in it to get it anywhere near running well. So there's like 2 washers in one of the sides. Just stuff like that. I've had my last Police came with a chip out of the back lock there. There's some issues, there's some problems, but they're not crazy problems. They're just problems that if you're a knife nerd and you pour over your knife, you probably will notice them. So that's probably one thing. These two might be safer bets for like if you're getting it and you want it to be perfect. Yeah, then the golden ones are probably going to be better off. For sure, but then if you're after something that's the biggest and the strongest and you don't really care if it's like got minutiae just right, then I think the Police is the best. And I think the Police is actually still my favorite out of the 3. The military has the best action. It's because it's a liner lock and you can flick it open really easily. You can one hand shut it and all that good stuff. It is, yeah, kind of a bit more slick, a bit more of a, I don't know, a bit more of a flippable, fun play, you know, enjoyable enough to just whip out and play with. Kind of, and then these two are a little bit more cumbersome owing to their mid backlocks. So there's that. All 3 have the same style of clip, like in terms of how it goes, except the military has the 3-way clip, the 3 screws here, which I feel is a little bit uglier, but that's me. It doesn't matter at all when it comes down to it. My favorite thing is the steel on the Police 4, the K390. I just thought it was such a cool exotic choice for Spyderco to go and ship over to Japan just to put in this large folding knife. This is probably why it's my favorite still. The K390 lasts a lot longer than S30V and even a little bit longer than the M4 when sharpened right, so there's that too. So that's probably my favorite, but all 3 of these are great choices if you're after a larger Spyderco. The amalgam I always found was great, but just a little bit weird. There's certain things about it made it a little bit of a learning curve to just sort of open and close and use, but it had great action and it was a good big fun knife to use as well. Really good ergonomics. All 3 of these really nice simple ergos. Sal makes knives for the hand rather than for the eye, so all really comfortable, no worries at all. And all have got about the same blade thickness, with maybe the military being just the slight winner in thickness and the Police and the Native Chief being about the same. So I think these are 3.5 and this is 3.7, so there's that. But overall, real safe choices. All 3 of them, just whether you like your large Spydercos or not, is what you're going to be looking at, mainly. Now, against the other military series, let's check those out. Alrighty, so these are the 3 in the military series as they currently are. So there's the military, the paramilitary 2, and the para 3. Which is a very silly name for a new model of knife, because this isn't called the military 2, but then this is called, yeah, I think this conversation's been done to death, but I thought I'd bring it up because it makes no sense. Anyway, military is huge compared to the para 3. slightly bigger, actually still pretty huge compared to the Para 2. I always find the Para 2 and the Para 3, I don't really notice the size difference that much in hand, because I think the Para 3 has very intelligently tapered its handle away rather than having as much of a hook at the end here. So even when the Para 3 is not quite filling your hand, you don't really notice a sudden stop to the end of it. Whereas when the Para 2 is in my hand, because I can feel that sudden stop because of that sort of ending parrot's beak type feature there, I really, if I was to close my eyes and hold both of these, I mean, it isn't night and day, really. And it's funny because there are some, some parts of these are noticeably smaller, like of this one. But yeah, anyway, it's just, I'm perhaps not as fussy or whatever it is, but these two, there is less difference. But when you step up to the military, it really does feel like, it feels like you're using a dialing wand now. Like, it's absolutely enormous. Hyperbole much, I know, but it feels so much bigger, and also owing to the line lock being there, it just feels like such a different knife. Yeah, it looks very similar, and I guess they've kept with the bone-shaped sort of curvy handles. I suppose the blades, I guess, are very similar, especially between the Para 2 and the military. Para 3 has kind of got a bit of a stumpier, sort of shorter belly, about 50-50 belly, whereas these are about sort of 65-35% belly. I don't know, all sorts of steels available in these. This one's just on loan for too long now, sorry Trav, I'll get it back to you. The Rex 45, which is a pretty cool sprint run, I guess, in the orange handles there on the Para 3. This is the S110V Evergreen model, and there is an S110V Evergreen model of this as well, which is probably the one that I'd pick up too. S110V is a great steel. A little bit difficult to sharpen sometimes, but it's, that's the price you pay for a long-lasting edge, isn't it? So yeah, that's the comparison, I suppose, just visually. They've all got this giant lanyard hole, which is something that I have never needed. These two are obviously running a compression lock, which is a sort of a reverse version of the liner lock. And I think I saw a video, I reckon Nero might have done a video about why this is still a liner lock, and there is a reason for it, but yeah, don't know. I'm not sure how well this would go as a compression lock. I'm sure it'll be fine, but hey, it is what it is. Four-way pocket clips on these Para 2 and 3s as well, and then this is just your single large clip. So it really does feel like these two are more for EDC. EDC standard, EDC for someone who wants a bit more of a tough guy name, and then this is a proper sort of maybe outdoors or larger jobs knife. It just doesn't quite feel as sort of designed spec towards everyone carrying it. And the military seems like it's for some, slightly larger jobs. And I think if I was doing slightly larger jobs and I had only these three, yeah, I'd probably grab this one first up, for sure. In terms of overall thicknesses, no real change. The military's, nah, you know what? I think they're all about as thick as each other. Yeah, because that was one thing about the Para 3. It's about the same thickness, basically, as the Para 2 and the military. So often people sort of said, Para 3, I think it's done well, it's sold amazingly, but one of the things that was often said against it is that it is kind of, well, so this is a big knife that carries like a little knife, this is a little knife that carries like a big knife still, and I think that's mainly owing to the width. So, anyway, those three things, all are wonderful knives. I probably like this one first, then this one, then this one. Don't know. It's they're all great. Then they are really just up to how big your hand is and what kind of size knife you even want. So there you go. So that's the military review, guys. Thank you so much. I'll no doubt be back very soon with another review of something that you really wanted to see, like say Metamucil. We'll have a good look at this and the effects of this next time.